Merry Christmas from Demeech!
2023 has been an insane year for gaming. This is the best year Nintendo has ever had, and we have gotten so many amazing games, but this year is also significant, for me at least, because it introduced me to the world of retro handhelds. The Miyoo Mini Plus really got me hooked into the retro handheld scene. I absolutely love it and consider it an essential for all gamers. But the thing is, there are so many handhelds to choose from, and you might be wondering which one to get. For this episode of Gator Garage, let's imagine we're on a deserted island, which just so happens to have an electrical outlet and Wi-Fi, though they're powered by coconut milk, so we're gonna have the theme intact. What I'd want is something powerful, something that can play the most systems, but one that can play them incredibly well. And of course, something reasonably priced too, because remember, we're on a deserted island. We already spent quite a bit on our emergency supply of hot Cheetos and Livewire Mountain Dew. What I'd love is something that can play some GameCube games, and while we're finally getting remakes of GameCube games on the Switch, most of the games have never been re-released, and it's a huge shame, because it's one of the best libraries and has some of the most unique Nintendo games ever made. And I'd also be down for some PlayStation 2, which is my favorite PlayStation console. I've used many retro handhelds and wanted to find something that's a powerhouse and also portable. And I think I found the perfect system for our deserted island adventure. This is the Anbernic RG405V. It released by Anbernic in the fall, and I was super hyped for it. And after getting my hands on it, I was very impressed. In this episode of Gator Garage, we'll be reviewing and showcasing the Anbernic RG405V, and why it's the best retro handheld, and the only one you'll need. Taking a look at the 405V, it's clear it's an absolute behemoth compared to most retro handhelds. It's significantly larger than the Miyoo Mini Plus. It's a similar height to the Game Boy Color, but it is wider. However, it's still more portable than a Nintendo Switch. This is where you start to lose some of that pocketability. It's still very portable. I wear cargo shorts and have no problem bringing it with me. However, I'll even admit it's not portable in the sense of something like a Miyoo Mini Plus. But the thing is, the 405V is one of the most powerful retro handhelds out there, and it makes sense for it to be large not just for power, but to accommodate for many other features as well. Taking a look at the design itself, not only is it large, but it's definitely in charge too, with its unique wood grain look. There are other colors available, such as one inspired by the original Game Boy, and another based on the Game Boy Color, but I opted to go for the wood grain version for a few reasons. It's the only handheld that has this design. I have an atomic purple Miyoo Mini Plus and an Anbernic RG35V with that classic Game Boy design, so I wanted something unique. Not only does it look really cool, but it feels great as well. Don't worry, it's not real wood. It's not going to rot. But hey, for that deserted island getaway, you could imagine your handheld is made from the shells of the coconuts. The buttons are identical to that of a standard controller. You got 4 face buttons, a D-pad, 4 trigger buttons, and 2 Hall Effect analog sticks, meaning no drift whatsoever. Everything feels great, and the buttons even go for that classic Super Famicom look, which I'm always a fan of. But what sets the RG405V apart from other handhelds is the gorgeous and large 4-inch screen. It looks incredible and brings new life to your retro games. What else is unique is a fan at the back of the device. Yes, I'm a fan of the device, but I'm talking about a literal one for air exhaustion. This is used to help accommodate for more powerful games. Battery is also pretty incredible, lasting up to 9 hours on a single charge. The design is cool and everything feels great, and the screen and battery life, just superb. But the reason why you'd buy a handheld is to play games. So what games can it play, and how does it play them? Unlike most retro handhelds, the RG405V solely uses an Android-based OS rather than Linux. If you're wondering what the difference between the two is, Android tends to be optimized better and can run more powerful games, but with Linux, the UI is more customizable, making the handhelds feel more like a dedicated handheld and not just a phone with buttons. Here's where things get interesting though. The UI for the RG405V is similar to that of a smartphone when you first boot up the system, but by pressing the side button, you'll boot into Anbernic's custom UI, making it feel a lot more like a dedicated handheld. With the UI Anbernic made, it's not as fleshed out as I would have liked. All the popular systems are here, but more obscure systems like the Sega CD and Virtual Boy are not part of the UI. And there doesn't appear to be box art scraping, which makes the menu feel a bit bare bones. The good news is that this is Android, so you can use a different launcher for the UI. I've been using Daisho, and it's been working great. You will have to configure paths for the ROMs, as well as what RetroArch cores or emulators to use, but it's definitely worth it. Unlike the Miyoo Mini Plus and most Anbernic devices, the RG405V isn't as plug and play. Here's what I did. I created a folder on the SD card called Anbernic Games, and then put folders for each system I wanted to play in the Anbernic Games folder. For my Game Boy Advance games, I put them in a folder simply called Game Boy Advance Games, located in Anbernic Games. You can name it whatever you want, but I do this to stay organized. From there, in the default OS, select the path for the ROMs, and then you're good to go. Every system recognized the ROMs except for the Super Nintendo. Not because of the ROMs, but because with Anbernic's default UI, they have to end with .smc. Let's say you want to play Super Mario Kart. It has to be called Super Mario Kart.smc, but this is only a problem in the default OS. I'd recommend going for Daisho for the default UI. You can download it from the Google Play Store, and setting it up is quite easy. There's a bit of tinkering involved, and it's important to bring it up, but personally, I will always replace the default microSD card with a branded one, and set up custom firmware if possible, so tinkering is something I always do. It's not a difficult process, though I understand that some just want a plug-and-play experience, but if you just want to play the system out the box, you have to understand that the microSD card the system might come with isn't reliable, and it's well worth curating your own game library and trying out different UIs. Now with everything set up, it's time to play some games and see how the 405V holds up. What I consider the standard for these retro handhelds is being able to play up to PlayStation 1 flawlessly, and I'm happy to say the 405V plays retro games flawlessly. With its large screen, it's one of the best ways to go about playing classic games. I mentioned the file name for Super Nintendo games needs to end with .smc for Super Nintendo games if you're using the default launcher, but they play and look great once everything is set up. In other words, it passed the Yoshi's Island test with flying colors. Every game from systems up to the PlayStation 1 I threw at the RG405V played flawlessly. But the reason you get a 405V over an entry-level system like the Anbernic RG35XX is for the increased power, so let's see how it handles more power-intensive games. Let's start with Nintendo 64. Nintendo 64 games are known to be tricky to emulate, and a lot of these handhelds struggle with them. But in the case of the RG405V, Nintendo 64 games play excellently. The best I've ever seen on a retro handheld. It uses the Miyoo 64 emulator, and since it's Android, it's optimized very well. Considering the size of the RG405V, there's increased power, which allow you to run Nintendo 64 games at a higher resolution without any problems. That screen is really the highlight here, and it makes a radical portable Nintendo 64, especially if you go for that transparent purple. You show the RG405V to any 90s kid, and they're instantly gonna be jealous, unless they were born in 99 and don't remember anything about the 90s. What they will remember is the 2000s and playing Nintendo DS games. Nintendo DS is always a system I strongly desire on these handhelds. It's my favorite Nintendo handheld with an incredible library of games, and on the 405V, Nintendo DS games look and play beautifully. The screen is also a touchscreen, making DS games more than ideal, and because it's a powerful handheld, you can even upscale DS games to make them look better than ever before. It uses drastic, meaning that you can also use just one screen if a game tends to focus on just one. I was really impressed with Nintendo DS games on the RG353V, but they're even better on the 405V. It's also capable of PlayStation Portable and Dreamcast. Those systems also work incredibly well. Already, we have a vast array of systems that can play on a single device, and they all play great. Safe to say, we won't be getting bored on this deserted island. Another cool aspect of the RG405V is that it has a gyroscope built in, meaning that you can play the Game Boy Advance games like WarioWare Twisted, where you tilt the system to play it. That is a game I highly recommend checking out. But hey, if you want to subject yourself to Yoshi Topsy-Turvy, it's more than possible to play it here. Just beware, because that is not a very good game. Already, this is one of the most powerful handhelds. It plays everything the RG353V can play, but plays them even better. But if there's one thing the RG353V couldn't do, is play games from the 6th generation. Things like PlayStation 2 and Nintendo GameCube were no-go on that device. This is why I wanted the RG405V. Because a portable GameCube? Now that is what dreams are made of. Everything so far plays beautifully. So now it's time for the ultimate test. Let's see how the RG405V handles peak gaming. Let's start with the PlayStation 2. I gotta be honest, I'm definitely more of a Nintendo guy, but the PlayStation 2 does have some great exclusives. Most of the PS2 games I played ran great. Crash Twinsanity runs flawlessly, and even Grand Theft Auto Vice City runs pretty well. Sometimes it won't reach the full frames per second, but most of the games ran smoothly. The only game I had issues with was Katamari Damacy, along with its sequel, We Love Katamari. If there's a lot going on, such as having many objects on screen, that's when the game will start to lag. I can deal with a few hiccups, but if the lag becomes increasingly unbearable, that's when I'll just avoid a game and deem it unplayable. But other than the Katamari games, everything on the PS2 end ran pretty well. I haven't tested out a ton of PS2 games, but compatibility is quite good, especially considering the price. And of course you can tinker with settings in the emulator, allowing for increased performance. GameCube, on the other hand, is my bread and butter. These are games I've played for well over a decade, and I know exactly how they're supposed to play. I can't remember the quadratic formula to save me on a final algebra exam, but I can tell you how many frames per second Mario Kart Double Dash is supposed to be, as well as every detail on what the games are supposed to look like. Out of the box, GameCube for the most part runs incredibly well, but for maximum performance, you'll need to adjust some settings in Dolphin. I make sure to use the Vulkan video end for graphics for most games, and the clock speed is underclocked to 90%. And with those settings, most games play excellently. Super Mario Strikers is an absolute blast to play on the RG405V. It runs perfectly and looks great as well. It's a very pick-up-and-play game, meaning it's great to play on the go. Luigi's Mansion also plays and looks great. Even Pac-Man World 2 runs flawlessly. The rule of thumb to keep in mind for GameCube games is as long as the games aren't too demanding, they should run flawlessly. And most of the popular games I have tested run very well. Super Smash Bros. Melee, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, and even Wario World play great. Some games don't run perfectly, but for most, they'll be perfectly playable. Mario Kart Double Dash will play fine for most. The frame rate averaged at about 45 frames per second. For me, it's all or nothing, so I didn't consider it ideal. But most will be fine playing it. That's the thing with the 405V. In some cases, it'll come down to if you're okay with a few hiccups for that portability, but most of the time, you don't even need to compromise, because most GameCube games run very well. There is some tweaking involved, but it's not difficult to do. The only game that was unplayable I tested was F-Zero GX. A real shame to be honest, considering it's one of my favorite GameCube games. I'm hoping we see a handheld in the future that's affordable and can have near 100% GameCube compatibility. But you're looking at about 80% here, and you can get even more out of it if you change settings. While it's not perfect, I'm quite happy with the GameCube performance on the 405V. Technically, Wii games can run. but none that I tested ran anywhere close to smooth, so I don't even count it. So when it comes to compatibility, the RG405V can play anything up to GameCube. You primarily would get a retro handheld to play games, but considering the 405V is an Android device as well, it does have features a smartphone would have. You can browse the internet with it, can play Android apps, and even listen to music and watch movies.
So hello guys, and welcome to another episode of the 12 Days of Switchmas.
There's even an FM radio built in, where you just connect your wired headphones to act as an antenna. A headphone jack and a built-in radio are features we don't even see on modern smartphones, because nowadays, the future is removing basic features instead of adding them. But hey, this is really cool and I'm pleasantly surprised. Personally, I wouldn't use the 405V to play mobile games, but you can do it, though some games won't be compatible because the screen ratio is 4:3 instead of the usual Android aspect ratio. But it is ideal to play games that support controllers like the Sonic remasters, and they're excellent to play on this device. So far, everything about the Anbernic RG405V has been incredibly positive, but there are two aspects worth bringing up that I wish features were added for. For one, a lot of these handhelds have both Android and Linux. You can often switch between the two, and what I would do is switch to Linux to play retro games up to PlayStation 1, and then switch into Android for more advanced stuff. I really like the customization that Linux offers because it feels more like a dedicated handheld, but unfortunately here, it's just Android. Not that big of a deal, but considering how many handhelds have dual UIs, I would have liked to see it. But perhaps the biggest omission is the lack of HDMI out, meaning that you can't consoleize the RG405V. This is a bummer because that's one of the things I love about retro handhelds, the fact that they act as handhelds, but you can also use them as a console. And considering how many powerful games you can play on this, it would have been amazing to have HDMI out. But unfortunately, it's not included here, so it's strictly a handheld system. But those are really the only two criticisms I have towards the system, and overall, things have been incredible. We've established the Anbernic RG405V has an excellent build quality, stellar battery life, a beautiful screen, and can play anything up to Nintendo 64 essentially perfectly. And while PlayStation 2 and GameCube aren't 100% compatible, the compatibility is still great, and you have Android features as well, considering it is an Android device. Is this the best handheld you can currently get? And would it satisfy your deserted island getaway? What the Anbernic RG405V is a retro handheld. It's designed to play retro games and is priced at about $150. You can even get it for less than that. Not to mention it has that classic Game Boy design. Out of all the handhelds that I've used, the RG405V is the one I use the most. It satisfies my desire for a portable GameCube very well, and it has a great screen and lasts a very long time. It's perfect for a long plane ride, or just when you want an extended gaming session. If you're looking for bang for your buck, the RG405V is an excellent system. It is significantly more expensive than a Miyoo Mini Plus or Anbernic RG35XX, but it's much more capable and powerful. The only major criticism I have is that there's no HDMI out, so unfortunately, you can't consoleize the RG405V, but most are just looking for a handheld, and I'm happy to say the Anbernic RG405V gets a Demich seal of approval. It's an excellent handheld to get for Christmas, and I've had an absolute blast with it. If you want to get one for yourself, I got mine from LitNXT. And you can use my link and affiliate code LitNXTCreator for a sweet discount, because you deserve to treat yourself to some portable GameCube this Christmas. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, and keep calm and Dada on. And most importantly, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.